It's exciting to be back here in our studios here in Lagos, Nigeria. Thank you very much for joining us this morning on Breakfast Center. A lot of stories have happened over the weekend, and we'll begin this morning's conversation with maybe some of our top stories from the weekend. I am Olive Emodi, and you're welcome.
And I am Usaogi Ogbonwa, as always encouraging you to be a part of our conversations this morning from whichever part of the world that you might be watching us from. And of course, if you're joining us on YouTube, leave a comment. You could also simply tweet at News Central TV and share your thoughts with us on any of the major conversations happening this morning on the program. We, of course, you kick off with our top stories from the weekend, probably starting with the president's return to the country. If you remember, over the weekend, he arrived, and then there's, of course, a lot of people who have shared their views, first of all, on the reasons behind his trip and the controversy surrounding the need to travel to the UK and then to France for a vacation, as it was described. But the president eventually arrived, back in Nigeria over the weekend, welcomed by Abdullahi Ganduje, the APC chairman, and of course, Governor Sanwo-Olu, the Lagos State governor, and a few other people who were there at the airport to welcome him. Over the weekend also, we saw that there was a message put out by the Labour Party presidential candidate, former governor of Anambra State, Peter Obi, also criticizing the president's trip to the UK and then to France, but pointing out that he found it funny, and it wasn't necessarily a good sign to see that the president, while he was in France, couldn't attend the summit that was scheduled in Sweden. He instead sent the vice president to represent him in Sweden. The vice president, of course, was in Sweden. And of course, the news story says that he was able to sell the Nigerian business climate to these Swedish investors, and they will be likely investments coming from Sweden to Nigeria. But the key point, that I found from that particular story was, the many people agreeing with the point that Peter Obi made, that if the president was in France, he could have attended that summit by himself. He didn't need to send the vice president all the way to leave from Nigeria. Peter Obi pointed out the nautical miles that of course, are between Nigeria and Sweden compared to France and Sweden. And so it doesn't show that the government is in any way, shape, or form trying to save money. They are not being prudent with their spending, as a government as it stands. So there's that part. There's also the part where you see governors leaving their states. The governor of Lagos State, for example, flew from his state to Abuja to welcome the president, and of course will fly back to Lagos State to continue, in his role as governor, which once again points to the fact that there is still no interest in saving government funds. The resources that are meant to be used for the governance of the state are still not in any way being carefully managed in the current administration. And these, for me, are the two major points. A couple of weeks ago, I did put out my views criticizing the need for a vacation outside Nigeria, in the UK and France. And I said that, this is not a normal occurrence. You don't see this happen almost anywhere else in the world except in Nigeria. And we've made it common practice for our presidents to randomly just, travel to a different country and spend time there and come back whenever they choose to come back.
Right. I mean, there certainly has been criticism leveled against our style of governorship, our style of leadership in that regard. Not just in Nigeria, to be honest. William Ruto was called the flying president because of how many trips he had taken. So it's a thing that Africans frown upon, not because they do not want their presidents to travel, but because a number of times you find that the countries where this happens are countries that are already struggling. And we're talking about cutting the cost of governance. I don't want to overflog that story because you've spoken about it, but another angle to the president's trip is that upon his return, the chief security officer has been replaced. Official information says that he was removed for professional training, but according to the Nation reports that a private source tells them that, part of the conversation would be that when there's a new DG, it's expected that the new CSO, is brought in place, and that. So some of the questions that many people are starting to ask is it just the routine replacement because there's a new DG, or is there more to the story? Is there an issue, an angle to look at maybe regarding the president's timing? Is there a context that we're probably not seeing regarding the president's trip? I think that's another story that has made the headlines over the weekend.
Yeah, so there's that. But, for me, I didn't see anything particularly newsworthy about it. It's not, common that you see the CSO of a president or a governor change. If you remember, even previous governments, you see one face always standing behind, the president. President Buhari had pretty much same thing. There's always a familiar face that you see standing behind the president. And since President Tinubu came into office, I knew that face. I may not have known his name, but I knew that face. Yeah, that this is the person who's always behind the president. But I particularly don't see anything, wrong if for any reason that person is changed. The president and presidency is responsible for Mr. President's security, and of course, whatever it is that they choose to do with regards to chief security officer, there's nothing absolutely awkward or abnormal about it. Over the weekend, as well, the NSAS Memorial took place, the 20th of October, right, which of course has now been recognized every year to remember those who lost their lives in the NSAS struggle in the year 2020. I have, said that that particular date in Nigeria's history would always leave a stain on us as a people, on our government, and those who failed the Nigerian citizens. But of course, for those who are not aware, it is a period in the year 2020 where young Nigerians came out in their numbers, millions of them across the country, to demand an end to the Special Anti-Robbery Squad, to demand an end to police brutality, and to, also partly demand police reforms because they wanted to see a better policing structure in Nigeria. I've repeatedly asked the question, what has changed since then? Aside dropping the name Special Anti-Robbery Squad, in what ways has the Nigerian police been reformed? Right. Yesterday's arrest of some protesters, kind of showed that there's not very much that has changed with regards the approach to policing in Nigeria and the acceptance of criticism by the Nigerian state. So, you could quickly share your thoughts.
It really would always be a sad time. If we remember in 2020, on the 20th in fact, on the 21st, which is the day after NSAS, there was sadness so palpable, you could almost cut it. It was so thick, you could almost touch it. And Nigerians, Lagosians, we were mourning the loss of loved ones, friends, family. We witnessed with horror via Instagram Live how these young Nigerians were killed. And what was worse was how even months after and years after, Nigerians were being gaslit, to think that it didn't happen. There were denials. They at some point said that it was Photoshop, something that everybody watched happen live on Instagram. And what's even worse, like you've highlighted, is what reforms have been made. Ever since, the investigative committee was set up, there were certain recommendations by the panel. For example, closed circuit camera be attached to police officers to help keep them in check, psychological evaluations. There were some recommendations that were made. Between then and now, have these recommendations been implemented? The answer is no. And the sad thing is that it then makes us see that it makes us feel like the lives of these ones were lost in vain. Mr. Macaroni tweeted something yesterday again. He said he dedicated the NSAS anniversary memorial to Pelumi Onifade, who was allegedly killed in detention because he made a video of a politician shooting directly at NSAS protesters. We saw the video, right? It was all over social media. But then again, it just lets us make Nigerians feel like the authorities and those at the helm of power have so much power that, whatever thoughts the citizens have regarding checkmating their powers, it's not really put into consideration. And it always will be a sad time for us. And what's sadder is the fact that, or what's even more sad, is the fact that when you don't take account of your history, there's a chance that it can always repeat itself again. So to be able to ensure that something like this doesn't happen, we need to ensure that we keep talking about this. We learn our lessons. If you travel, for example, to Rwanda, one of their quote-unquote tourist sites would be, the Genocide Memorial. They talk about their history. It's not something that has been rewritten to appeal to certain taste buds. But if certain people have their way in Nigeria, the NSAS conversations will die down. It would never be spoken about again, and these lives will just end in vain. Some people have lost their careers. DJ Switch, for example, cannot confidently practice in Nigeria. I don't know where she is right now. She can't be in this country again, all because she chose to film what was happening and broadcast live for Nigerians to see.
Yeah, for you to have a memorial, there has to be, first of all, acceptance of the crimes that were committed, of the injustice that was committed. If you don't have that, you can have a memorial. and so on, until the Nigerian government, Lagos state government, and of course state governments across the country fully accept that these crimes were committed and the injustice, that was meted out to innocent Nigerians, we cannot be talking about a memorial. It's not just Pelumi Onifade. There's also Chijoke in Anambra State that was allegedly one of the victims of a police officer, something Okafor, James Wanfor, yes, he was alleged to have been the mastermind of a lot of the atrocities that took place in Anambra State SARS office, Okuzu. And of course, the Anambra State Police Command generally. The judicial panel of inquiry that was set up in different states, I remember that I saw that a legal practitioner had called out Anambra State government for still not adhering to the recommendations of the judicial panel of inquiry in Anambra State. But so, Pelumi Onifade, Chijoke, for me, are the two names that I would always clearly remember. But it's not just them. It's every other young Nigerian, really, who has been a victim of police brutality, even till date. As at a week ago, there was still a report of a young man being shot by the police in Enugu State.
What of the young man who was being chased into the canal and then when he was brought out?
Allegedly, the police denied it. But, the point is, till date, the brutality that triggered the start of the NSAS protest in 2020, the brutality that we witnessed and we saw during the protest until the 20th of October in 2020 and beyond, and the ones that we continue to see till date, all these victims, must be highlighted, and they're the reasons for the memorial, they're the reasons for these conversations. Nigeria died in the hearts and minds of many people on the 20th of October in 2020. Right. Many people used that day as their decision to leave Nigeria and never
exactly.
return.
I know a number of people that after that the NSAS protest, they all left the country. And what's even worse is, whilst we're not yet at the point where we can say we fully trust the police, trust how they handle equipment, handle guns. We are then talking about a bill to arm the Federal Road Safety Corps. We're just further pushing ourselves down this hole. But again, we just want to use this opportunity to say that our hearts, our thoughts, and our prayers are with Nigerians in general, and in particular with the families of those who lost loved ones during the NSAS protest. May their names never be forgotten. Now let's move on to our final story this morning from the weekend, which is the political rumble where, in Rivers State, we're seeing Nyesom Wike, former Governor Nyesom Wike, scolding Alhaji Atiku Abubakar, telling him to resign. It's a number of conversations that have happened. Wike was hosting a luncheon in Rivers State, appreciating members of his team, and in appreciating them, Atiku Abubakar had, of course, earlier on applauded Siminalayi Fubara and how he has been able to uphold, quote-unquote, democracy in the state, especially with regards to having the elections held. Nyesom Wike criticized how Siminalayi has handled things, criticized the holding of the elections, also criticized Alhaji Atiku Abubakar because Alhaji Atiku Abubakar has said something in the line of that election signifying that the people of Rivers have rejected godfatherism and politics. And Nyesom Wike says, well, if you think that an election where the courts did not approve, the Federal High Court did not, INEC hadn't given out materials, is Rivers people rejecting me, then you, that on the national level you have tried and tried and tried over again, Nigerians have rejected you, go home. So it's just a war of words between both parties, which many would argue is the basis of the drama, the crisis, and the chaos that PDP is facing. That the main parties really that this is about, it's not necessarily about what's happening in Rivers State in particular. It's mainly an Alhaji Atiku Abubakar fight versus a Nyesom Wike fight, or Nyesom Wike. Yeah, so it just feels like those are the main parties, and this might have started when Nyesom Wike did not get the presidential ticket in the People's Democratic Party. So it's just a number of things that have happened and continue to happen in the People's Democratic Party. He said something I find very interesting when he talked about how the PDP and the APC, of course, he's very firmly behind he's in the PDP, but also very firmly behind an APC-led administration, saying that he will still continue to support President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. And he said what's happening in Rivers State is a rainbow coalition. That's what he referred to it as. The PDP and the APC working together in Rivers State is what he called the rainbow coalition. But he doesn't seem to be letting up. It seems like this is just the beginning for Nyesom Wike. He doesn't seem like he's tired of any fight. And he's saying people should stop telling him to forgive. Forgive what? criticized Siminalayi Fubara's approach, talked about how Siminalayi has insulted the people who labored to put him there. So there's no forgiveness conversation.
Yeah, and the interesting thing with this is, when you ask members of the PDP, they tell you that there's no, chaos in the party. Everything is calm. Every now and then, there, might be arguments here and there, but these are clear signs that there is major chaos in the party. And I don't know how this same party, plans to build itself towards the next general elections in 2027, when you have two major political figures in the party going at each other. We have leadership of the party itself in chaos. The PDP's national chairman, and of course, the reported factional chairman of the PDP as well. So there's obviously a lot of chaos in the party. Does Nyesom Wike have a point, with regards his maybe challenging Atiku Abubakar's possibility of emerging once again as a candidate? Yeah, he does. And it's not the only one. Even other members of the party silently say the same thing, that they are also tired of seeing Atiku Abubakar always emerging as the party's presidential candidate. Even opposition members say pretty much the same thing, that that's one of the major challenges that the party has, that you've refused to let that presidential ticket be given to someone else. So I mean, they obviously are strong points that have been made against Atiku Abubakar. Does Atiku Abubakar also have his own point? Challenging the presence and the existence of godfatherism, the allegation of godfatherism in River State? Yes, he does. But the key thing here is there is obviously a major challenge in the party. And those who say that Nyesom Wike's role in the PDP while working for the APC government is to ensure that the PDP continues to remain in turmoil and in chaos and is never able to unite as a lead opposition party, those people may not be entirely wrong in their analysis, because that's what it almost seems like. That if elections were to hold next week, between these major political parties, that the PDP as it stands will not be able to have its house in order, because it has a major player of the party working, in the APC government and constantly challenging the emergence of the presidential candidate from the party. That doesn't go, in a way that he desires. So good luck to them, as it stands.
Of course, there are people who think that Nyesom Wike's actual end goal is to still one day be able to say that he's become president of Nigeria. And the next elections will prove a lot, especially what will happen in the People's Democratic Party. If they're going to find their rhythm before then as a formidable, right now they're supposed to be the biggest opposition party, but they're losing their rhythm. If they're able to put their house in order before 2027, are there chances that Nyesom Wike would likely get the presidential campaign ticket for the 2027 election? I guess time will tell.
Oh, well. Opposition party is not by name. It's not simply by having spread, national spread as they call it. It's not simply by having structure. That's not what an opposition party is expected to exist as. It's to actually provide opposition, provide alternatives, show that you are different. The PDP has not done that.
All right. We will talk more about these stories, and we have other stories as well this morning, but let's share with you what our top stories are, and after which we'll bring you breakfast headlines. This morning on Breakfast Central, police tear gas NSAS memorial marches at Lekki. We'll have one of them joining us on the show this morning. And still speaking about NSAS memorial, protesters regain freedom after arrest. And that's, of course, one of them who I mentioned earlier will be joining us. Federal government set to hand over national grid to private operators. And still looking at politics, Labour Party chief Dane accuses Abia government of intimidation. And we'll be reviewing the newspaper front pages as we do every morning. Join us this morning on Breakfast Central. But now let's bring you breakfast headlines.
Well, let's begin breakfast headlines by telling you that 22 protesters arrested by the police during the NSAS memorial at the Lekki toll gate in Lagos have been released. The protesters had gathered on Sunday morning to mark the 4th anniversary of the NSAS protests, which demanded an end to police brutality in Nigeria. Hassan Soweto, the national spokesman for the Youth Rights Campaign, confirmed the release of the protesters to journalists, revealing that the Lagos State Commissioner of Police personally visited Panti Police Station to facilitate their release. However, Soweto criticized the commissioner's actions, alleging that the arrest and assault happened in his presence. Now, security matters. Former Nigerian president and head of state Olusegun Obasanjo has visited Bauchi State, where he called for collective efforts to address the insecurity in the state. The former president made this known while in the state to inaugurate two major urban and rural renewal road projects executed by Governor Bala Mohammed. And also in the news, two businessmen, Ihejirika Okechukwu Emmanuel and Iwagu Ikedi Victory, as well as a Canada-based nurse, Usman Grace Khadijat, have been arrested by operators of the National Drug Law Enforcement Agency for attempting to import and export cocaine pellets and parcels of marijuana, a synthetic, or rather loud as it's popularly called, which is a synthetic strain of cannabis. Director, Media and Advocacy for the NDLEA, Femi Babafemi, in a statement said they were arrested at the Murtala Mohammed International Airport in Lagos. And that's where, of course, we will be wrapping up with Breakfast Headlines this morning. We have more news stories coming your way on Breakfast Central. Stay with us and let's get into our top stories. I am Ousted Ogbon.
The National Vice Chairman of the Labour Party Southeast, C.K. Igara, says he and some executives of the party have been subjected to untold humiliation and intimidation by the factional acting chairman of the party and Abia State government. He said they will no longer take lightly all the threats and discomfort they have suffered in the recent times, as Ima Oti and the state government will be held responsible. News Central's Chinwe Ogele has more.
Just like the meeting of Saturday at Abada was disrupted by some detectives, some members of the Labour Party leadership in the zone are meeting in the same space on Sunday to evaluate the events of the previous day. After spending nearly 12 hours in the custody of the police in Umuahia, the National Vice Chairman of the Labour Party in the Southeast, C.K. Igara, reveals there was no prior invitation by the police before his arrest.
Yesterday I was asking them, all these Gestapo, why not just invite me? I will come. If you invite me, I will come. But you have not invited me. And then what, you resort to come here to come and whisk me away as if you have seen a common criminal.
On the allegations by the factional acting chairman of the Labour Party in Abia State that Igara is impersonating and extorting members, he has this to say.
Based on the incompetent attitude of Imoti, the party dissolved Abia State and empaneled a new committee, a caretaker committee, for 3 months in line with the constitution of the party. And that brought Prince Dr. Gio Ndubeze as the acting state chairman.
As for Prince Ndubeze, the factional state chairman of Labour Party, there must be a thorough investigation into the arrest.
We are also happy that the police did the needful by releasing our national vice chairman within the time frame, although we will like the matter to be thoroughly investigated to know the reason for that. We are not going to just because he has been released and we allow the matter to die the way it came. No, it's impossible. So it's the accusation. We want it to be properly investigated, and somebody must be responsible because this is not the first time.
In solidarity, the Imo State chairman of Labour Party, who was in the meeting, Callistus Ihejagua, condemns the arrest of the party's zonal chairman, saying the party ought to eschew internal wrangling.
It's regrettable that the police could be used to intimidate and harass our party officers, especially in a state that is governed by a governor from Abia's Labour Party extraction. As a father, we are appealing to him to see the need to embrace the olive branch that our national chairman extended to everyone.
To what extent can the recent developments within the Labour Party that have pitched one-time party faithful against one another affect their chances at the forthcoming elections in Abia State? Only time will tell. In Omar for News Central, Chinwe Ugele.
Thank you very much, Chinwe Ugele, for that update. I mean, it's evidence that all isn't well in the Labour Party. It was the PDP we spoke about earlier, but the Labour Party has also been affected. Many had seen or looked up to the Labour Party as one party that would have a strong opposition. The Labour Party was undoubtedly a third force at the last election, the force that no one saw coming. But it would seem that things are starting to fall apart, especially with the recent court judgment affirming Julius Abure's authority, as a leader in the party. Now, before this court judgment, we've seen what happened with the party, how Alex Oti and the presidential candidate, Peter Obi, had then made their own stand. Now, it's not just even C.K. Igara. There's another Prince Ndubuisi or Ndubuezi. I'm not quite sure what his name is now. Yes, Prince G.O. Ndubuezi that was allegedly under arrest. So it feels like the allegations are that the governor is instigating law enforcement or setting the law in motion against these people because of the court judgment. And again, just like we said with the People's Democratic Party, if they must be a formidable third force, then they must put their house in order. But we'll talk more about this as we proceed with the show this morning. We're going to a quick break, and when we come back, more stories. Stay with us. The 20th of October marked the anniversary of the NSAS protest, a pivotal moment in Nigeria's history to commemorate the occasion where protesters gathered at the Lekki toll gate in Lagos State for a memorial event. And they were calling for the full implementation of the report submitted by various judicial panels of inquiry set up after the 2020 protest. But things took a turn when the police fired tear gas to disperse protesters and several individuals were arrested.
Fortunately, the authorities have since released those detained. The NSAS movement, which began in 2020, aimed to bring attention to police brutality and advocate for reforms within the Nigerian police force. The protest raised national conversations about accountability, justice, and the need for systematic change in Nigeria. Joining us to discuss this is social activist Hassan Taiwo Soweto. Good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks.
We also have joining us virtually human rights activist Inebehe Effiong. Good morning. Thanks for joining us, Effiong.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
All right, I'm going to start with you. Just to get a quick summary of where we are today. 2020 was a pivotal year. It should have been a pivotal year in the conversations surrounding ending police brutality. So can you let us know where we are today, inclusive of the judicial panels, that were set up in different states across the country? Has there been any progress made?
Thank you. Not much progress has been made. The understanding was that when these panels were constituted across the states and the FCT, that after they submit their report, one would have thought that the government would see the need to implement them. But like we have seen in previous similar inquiries in the past, the federal government and the state governments were quite deceitful by basically dumping the reports in the dustbin and then abandoning the recommendations that were made. In terms of payment of compensation to victims of police brutality, which was one of the key demands of the protesters, the government has not done anything to address that, except for Lagos, where some monies were paid to some victims. Across the states and even Abuja, the reports have not been implemented. As a matter of fact, it seems that the cases of police brutality have only worsened. Nigerians are still being harassed on a daily basis. Extortion on the highway has not stopped. People are still being killed extrajudicially by our police. Nigerians are still being arrested for civil matters. People are still being detained beyond the constitutional period. We are still seeing pervasive corruption in the police. So that makes you wonder whether those who claim to be leaders or politicians in this country, are really serious people. Because given the impact that protest had nationally and internationally, the attention that was drawn to the years of decay, the years of the rot in the police, we would have expected the government to take some measures to address the issues that the protesters raised. But quite unfortunately, 4 years after, this is where we are. Nothing has changed in terms of the behavior of the average policeman on the road and even at the police station. Nigerians are still having very horrible experiences with the police. In terms of other reforms that the protesters demanded, even regarding the welfare of policemen, again, nothing significant has been done. Nothing significant has been done. The institution is still grossly underfunded. It is still citizens who are taking responsibility for funding the police. When you go to the police station to file a complaint, they demand what we call mobilization, and that is the money and the resources that they use to basically claim that they are doing investigation. So there is so much that requires to be done at the moment. The issues regarding respect for the rule of law generally have not been addressed. And I'm particularly pained that in the case of Lagos, despite the massacre at the toll gate that was committed on the 20th of October, the recommendation of the panel that the officers who were involved in shooting Nigerians to be penalized, no single military official to date have been brought to justice. Even the renaming of the toll gate, the government has also ignored that recommendation. So all this is a way of telling Nigerians that protesting or demanding change through legitimate means is not acceptable to the Nigerian state. It appears that it is only when people resort to extra-constitutional means, that the government begins to listen to them. Like we saw in the Niger Delta, where the years of agitation for environmental justice was ignored, until the movement for the emancipation of the Niger Delta men and others took up arms and fought in the Nigerian state. That was when the late President Gachagua decided that it was time to look at what the Niger Delta people were saying. We are seeing a similar situation now in the southeastern region, where there have been protests of marginalization, and the government has used force to quell those protests. Now the situation has become very volatile and violent. So It makes you wonder, does the Nigerian state really have interest in listening to peaceful and legitimate demands of citizens, or must we always resort to violence before government attends to what people want?
Now that you've mentioned protests, I know you've touched on it, but I want us to speak about it again. If we refer to the ECOWAS Community Court of Justice verdict on the 10th of July, it's condemned the government's violent attack on peaceful protesters. We have in the studio here Mr. Hassan Soweto, who was unfortunately arrested yesterday, but released, and we'll have him speak about that shortly. But what is the position of the law regarding peaceful protest, and where are we? And what really is the future of protesting in Nigeria from all indications?
As a matter of fact, the current legal regime is very much in favor of peaceful protest. Not only is protest a constitutional right recognized by Section 39 of the Constitution, which guarantees the right to peace, to freedom of expression, and Section 40 of the Constitution, which guarantees the right to freedom of association and peaceful assembly. The National Assembly has also passed recent legislations that have further strengthened the rights of Nigerians to protest, to hold public rallies and processions. For instance, Section 83 sub 4 of the Police Act 2022 allows the police, or gives the police a responsibility to provide security to protesters. There's also a similar provision under the Electoral Act that once people notify the police that they want to protest, the police have a duty to guarantee that protest, to be sure that it is peaceful. Indeed, the Police Act recognizes the right to protest and carry out processions on public highways and other public places. But what we are seeing now is that the government has shown gross disregard for this right. People are being targeted for gathering, for merely carrying placards. Nigerians are being charged for treason. We are seeing the trivial effort to bastardize our criminal justice system by arresting and arraigning protesters in court on frivolous charges. This simply has to stop. The law is very clear that citizens have the right to gather, citizens have the right to express themselves, and if we claim to be a democracy, or aspire to be a democracy, the Nigerian state has the responsibility to respect his rights, respect his obligations under international law, and respect his responsibilities under Nigerian law. Currently, that is not the case. The Tinubu regime is following the path of the Buhari regime. It is still the same culture of crackdown, the same culture of impunity, the same culture of lawlessness that we are witnessing on a daily basis. And this kind of behavior stands condemned. The attempt to clamp down on people for expressing themselves simply has to stop. It has no basis in law. It has no basis in morality. It has no basis in common sense. And that is why it has to stop.
All right. Inibe Effiong, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your thoughts regarding the NSAS protest. There's so much that still needs to be done. We have a long way to go, but thank you very much for your time with us. All right. We'll now bring the conversation back into the studio where Hassan Taiwo Soweto, who was at the, I believe, at the toll gate yesterday and was arrested and eventually released, is here, and he'll share his story. Thank you very much again for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, so talk to us about yesterday. You were arrested. Take us through the journey from the point where you got to the toll gate, what you met, how you got arrested, and then got released.
Well, let me start by saying that it was a complete show of shame for the police yesterday because they fully demonstrated that as far as they are concerned, Nigerian citizens are slaves who have no right. Because this is not the first time we have been holding protests in Lagos. In fact, since June 12th of this year, we have been holding protests. For 10 days in August, we had a protest. And the protest in Lagos was generally adjudged to be peaceful and organized because of how protest organizers were very much responsible for ensuring that things went okay. So that when we went to the toll gate yesterday, we were also of the same mind of having an organized commemoration, of that very tragic occurrence 4 years ago. We had with us placards, a banner, and a wreath to place at the toll gate to commemorate. But as soon as we came down from our vehicle at the toll gate, and we started organizing ourselves with our banners and we were approaching the toll gate, the police, a group of policemen, possibly numbering over 50 or thereabout, began to march towards us aggressively. And they were led by CSP Adetayo Akerele, who is the chairman of the Lagos State Task Force, somebody who was with us during the 10 days of protest in August. As soon as they were almost getting close to us, I asked our comrades who were holding banner to pause because, there was a need to ensure that both, groups do not clash because there was a need to show to the police that we did not mean any aggression. So we paused, but they kept coming. As they were coming, some layers of the police began to flank us. But despite that, I moved forward to meet CSP Adetayo Akerele. And I said that, I'm sure you still remember me. My name is Soweto. You were with us in August during the protest. This is why we are here. As I was speaking to him, I started hearing shouts from behind me because apparently his men had outflanked us. They were already behind, us, and they began to harass protesters right there behind me. I began to hear shout. And just a few minutes after, 2 hands grabbed me. 4 hands right now because there were 2 FT police officers who came around me, grabbed me in front of a CS Adetayo Akerele. And as they grabbed me, I then said, oh, okay, so this is an arrest. We are not resisting, we'll follow you. He began dragging me. And as they were dragging me, the pocket of my trouser was just being torn. But then I followed them. Interestingly, none of our people resisted arrest. But as they were dragging me towards the Black Maria, a third police officer came and then just punched my face, knocking my glasses off my face. These glasses now is partly broken. I'm only just managing to put it on my face. And that's where I had to then tell them that I'm disabled. I can't see without my glasses. And you have just knocked it off. And it was completely unprovoked. 2 FT men were holding me already, dragging me towards the Black Maria. What is the tension of the third person who then punched me? So you could, and that pattern of attack is what every member, of the protest experienced. People did not resist arrest. Despite that, the police made sure to beat them thoroughly before dumping them to the Black Maria. So that what was clear right from yesterday was that the arrest and the brutalization was more or less a revenge for the fact that we have been protesting over the past few periods. And the police felt that yesterday they had enough of it. Many of our people were thoroughly beaten. One person had blood coming out of his nostril. And as I yesterday night around 8 p.m. before I left, he was coughing out blood. And we have insisted that he must visit a medical laboratory that yesterday night. I'm yet to reach out to him this morning. 2 protesters, a male and a female, were sexually molested. The male had his genitals grabbed and squeezed. The female had her breast squeezed, and there were hands inside her genitals.
By who?
By police officers. The commissioner of police, Lanre Shola, was there. Everything happened under his nose.
Did this happen outside or inside the Black Maria?
Outside the Black Maria. Everything happened. And once they are done with you, after they have completely molested you, brutalized you, they then dump you inside the Black Maria. So before you get to the Black Maria, it takes 10, 15 minutes of 4 or 5 people just exhibiting all kinds of savagery on you. Right there at the toll gate.
And this sexual assault was witnessed by all the protesters?
Yes. One person was stripped naked. His name is Remed Guns. We had to find a rope to hold his trouser in order to preserve his dignity. But it didn't end there. When we got to Panti police station, I had my clothes, because it was just my trouser, the pocket that was torn in the process of the policemen dragging me. And then my glasses knocked off my face. I didn't know that I had not yet seen the worst of it until we got to Panti, and one officer in Nandi, James, actually tore my clothes. I was wearing a black dress, a native dress. He tore it from my armpit down, right there at Panti. And of course, there were other kinds of events that went on in Panti. But then, what was striking was how the CP wanted to then play the game of creating the impression that it wasn't aware of all of this, because about an hour or so after we were at Panti, or maybe 2 hours, the CP drove in and then started to appeal to us. But what was interesting was that despite everybody who had suffered all kinds of molestation and brutality, telling the CP what our account of what happened and mentioning the names of police officers who were directly responsible, I particularly mentioned Inamdi James severally, who was there at that police station. Of course, he was already in hiding as soon as the CP came. The CP didn't make any attempt to even fish him out. All he just did was just promising that he would look into it. And then he made a point, which I think the Nigerian public need to be aware of, that he had clear instructions that everything that happened yesterday was not up to him. He couldn't have done otherwise because he had clear instructions. And that, in fact, could have been worse than that.
Sorry.
Because of the clear instructions.
Can you please take that back again? You said he said all that happened.
It was not up to him. It was clear instructions.
From who?
He didn't state it. But what is obvious from that statement is that when you are talking of the police institution today, you are not talking about an independent body that is out there to preserve the right and dignity of Nigerian citizens. That is what is there on paper or in the Constitution. But in the real sense of the word, the police and the army are simply instruments of class oppression and class coercion. It is not difficult to understand the meaning of that statement that he had clear instructions and where those clear instructions would have come from. But don't forget that the massacre 4 years ago at Lekki Toll Gate was also a product of clear instructions by certain people in power, especially those who had business interests at the Lekki Toll Gate, the Lagos State government, and the Buhari government, who felt that they had had enough of the NSAS protest. And now the protest had to be drowned in blood so that the Nigerian youth would never, ever dare to challenge the state again. Those clear instructions were also made for certain quarters. And during all of the presentations at the judicial panel of inquiry, many protesters, lawyers, and co. actually presented clear evidence to show where these clear instructions came from. Don't forget that the current president of Nigeria, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, was not a president at that time, but he actually was on video justifying the killings, asking why young people were at Lekki Toll Gate in the first place. But up to now, none of the powers and principalities who were directly involved in that massacre, none of the army officers, none of the police officers or politicians have been in any way, punished today for that crime. So it is not difficult to then understand why the same kind of violence was visited on us yesterday. And when the CP said it could have been worse than that, what it clearly meant was that perhaps life could have been lost. but he only used his own discretion, to allow things to go at the level it went. But what happened yesterday was a complete despoilation, of our human dignity. Everything that we hold dear as a citizen of this country.
There was no reason given for your arrest.
There was no charges. That is why, and I must thank our lawyers, especially Barrister Effiong, Barrister Justice Eyis, as well as Barrister Ayodele. About 4 lawyers came down to party yesterday before we were released. And they have made it clear to the CP that the last have not been heard of this. Right now, we are collating evidence. And we are going to, challenge, the police institution in Lagos State as well as nationally. I'm sure that our lawyers are going to sue them. And of course, we are going to have all of this evidence clearly put out there. Because it is important to begin to show that if the Tinubu government, wants to turn, Nigeria into a police state, into a military dictatorship, we are not going to allow it. We are never going to consider right to continue to organize and protest against the poor policies of this government. Don't forget that this event of yesterday also happened against the climate of a situation in this country where protest is already, being equated to treason. We have 11 people, including the national coordinator of my organization, the Youth Right Campaign, Adiraboye Michael Lenny, who is standing trial for treason. In fact, their trial is going to start on November 8th at the Federal Court in Abuja. And what happened? Because they simply went out to protest in Abuja, between August 1 to 10. So we are faced with an evolution of what we call a capitalist civilian dictatorship under the Tinubu regime. And I'm calling on the trade unions, because if the trade unions are active, if the NS and TUC is really active, perhaps this level of militarization of the polity would not have succeeded. So it is very important that the workers' organizations, professional bodies, the media actually begin to act very decisively to push back at this attempt to rob the Nigerian people of every democratic right that we hold there. Don't forget that it took serious effort and sacrifices in blood during the period of military rule, that for what is called democracy today to even be won, for even the right to organize, the freedom of expression, to even be recognized in the Constitution in 1999, it took a whole lot of struggle. So to then have a regime call me, a regime that claimed to have been elected, beginning to erode all of this, we must not allow, you must not give in an inch.
Does it then tell, that the Buhari administration and the current administration, the Bola Tinubu administration, are no different with regards to their approach towards democratic norms, which of course include peaceful protesting?
Obviously, they are not. In fact, I think this is worse, much more than the Buhari government. Because don't forget that the Buhari government, even at the period of honeymoon, where it did not fully express its very repressive character until much later, the Tinubu government started right from day one by declaring war on the welfare of the Nigerian people, on the living condition of the Nigerian people, through the policy of subsidy removal and increase in energy costs. And right after that, it had continued to repress the right of Nigerians to speak against those policies, to organize against those policies. This government has a record that I think, has no equal in the last 24 years of actually, attacking the democratic right of the Nigerian people within even the first year in office. That's thrown people in prison, arrested people. There are bloggers who have been arrested. There are even journalists who have disappeared right in the first year of the administration of this regime. So when you then think of what would happen over the next 3 years or thereabout, then we have to begin to ask ourselves how much of our people would have to be arrested, how much of our people would have to be disappeared or killed, in the course of trying to speak truth to power, or journalists wanting to report the truth, or activists like us wanting to organize, to bring attention to issues that are affecting the people.
All right, let's go back to the story as well. You've run us through the point of you getting to the protest ground and being arrested. You mentioned that lawyers came before you were released, but take us through the process of, you being released. What was it like? Did you have to pay for bail? What was the procedure like?
The thing was that by the time we got to Panti, it became clear to the police that they had made a serious mistake. Because one, all of the material evidence available, to them and even to the Nigerian public via the live videos by journalists and co, clearly showed that there was there's nothing to hold us to. So to charge us to court would have been to take that kind of folly even to a higher level. So from that point of view, when the CP came, what he was interested in was how to de-escalate. In fact, many of protesters had their phones and gadgets, returned to them. Those whose money, because there was also a case of many people who had cash in their pocket. Some of those monies had been stolen, by police officers under the command of CSP Adetayo Akerele. About 41,000 naira was missing, from 2 or 3 protesters. By the time we began to take stock of everything that was brought to the police station. So, the CP had to return some of this money, which is a clear indication that he himself is admitting, that his men, had committed a crime. So I guess that it was the combination of all of this and the fact that, because we actually made it clear to them that we would like to be charged today, this morning, because we would like to see this case through, whether we had no right to actually mark and commemorate the NSAS massacre. But they thought that they didn't have any case. So we were simply released without any charges. So for us now, what needs to be done is that we will not allow this to go without a clear response. Because if you arrested us, you molested us, and then at the end of the day, you release us without any charges. So the question, therefore, is that why did we have to go through that ordeal? That means you have done something very wrong, very illegal. It's
but do you believe that
arrest.
anything will come out of it? And like you said, your lawyers have said they will not let it rest. You've said you will not let it rest. But do you believe anything will come out of it, especially because Nigerians and activists like yourself have argued that the recommendations from the last judicial panel of inquiry have not yet been implemented till date. So do you really see anything coming out of this?
The case of something coming out of it, there are in 2 ways. One is whether the Nigerian state, as presently constituted, has the capacity to rectify errors committed by its men, by its officials. Yes, my answer to that is that there's no expectation that if you sue the Nigerian police today, that anything will be done. But what I think would happen, and we have demonstrated that over and over again, is that when our rights are violated as Nigerian citizens, and we make effort to hold the institutions and the Nigerian state responsible for it, by challenging them in court or by challenging them in the court of public opinion, we're helping to create, a process of documentation of all of these grievances and all of these violations, in order really to begin to also establish a process of deterrence. If you look at the NSAS massacre itself, up till now, the mere fact that the Nigerian state, continues to defend itself as to why it was not responsible for that massacre at least once in a year is an indication of how much the agitations and campaign we have been holding over the past 4 years has had success. The other point is that Lekki toll gate now, even though it has not been renamed as the judicial panel, recommended, but the state has not been able to resume tolling in that place. And why? It is because there's a clear, they are afraid that there will be a complete revulsion of society should any business activity, resume in a place where, hundreds of souls were lost. So those are some of the things I think has been achieved. It is not completely over yet, obviously, but in establishing all of these things, in ensuring that, when crimes are committed by the state, that we tried to challenge it, we are also trying to build a process of resistance among the people, raising the confidence of the people that if anything happens, you must be prepared to challenge it. And I think that this is important in the entire process of trying to liberate Nigeria itself, because I firmly believe that where we're actually going to get justice at the end of the day for all of the crimes that have been committed against the Nigerian people, it's actually going to be, in the court of justice of the Nigerian people. By the time the revolution we are aiming for in this country happens, there are many people, no matter how long it has taken them to evade justice, no matter how long they have committed crimes against the Nigerian people, whether they are still alive at the time that revolution occurs, there are many people who will be adjudged at that point in the court of justice of the Nigerian people, whether they are still alive or not. And that is why we continue to have this confidence that this struggle must go on. By the time we establish...
I want to, because we're almost out of time for the conversation, I also want you to speak on, certain cases, that are maybe still pending and where we are with them. I remember that there's the young journalist, Pelumi Onifade.
Yeah.
There's also the Chijoke case. Those two names, was very popular in Anambra. Are there still some of these cases that are pending? Has there been any headway with these investigations? Has James Wafo or any of all those persons that have been named, has anybody, seen, a teaspoon of justice?
None. I mean, even here in Lagos State, at Kirikiri, there are still about 7 to 10 NSAS protesters who are still there in
From
prison.
the 2021?
Yes. Just a few weeks ago, I think one of them, was released. And that is also the situation you have across the country. None of the perpetrators of this violence against the Nigerian people, despite the copious evidence that were presented at the panel of inquiry, none of them have been tried, none of them have been arrested, none of them have been put to justice. But what is even much more particular is that between 2020 and now, even more grievous crimes by the Nigerian police have occurred, and the same level of impunity is what we have seen. So that at the end of the day, I think that what needs to be done really is to say that we need a revolution in this country that can ensure that we put in a government of the people, of the working class, of the poor, that can revisit all of these cases and ensure that justice is clearly done. Because there's a reason why the Nigerian state would not try its men who commit these crimes. It is because, again, the role of the police is to act as an instrument of class oppression and coercion. So whatever any police has done to the Nigerian citizen, it is endorsed by the state, even when the state issues statements saying otherwise.
Yeah.
So for us, it's a question of a revolution to alter the pattern of the situation and ensure that you have a government in place that is prepared to revisit all of these crimes, and begin to adjudge those who are responsible. How to get to that point, of that revolution is the work that we are doing in the black governance movement and the socialist movement. The Nigerian people must be prepared to rise, and when we rise eventually, justice will be done.
All right.
Well, thank you so much, Hassan Taiwo Soweto, for joining us this morning. It is a chilling account that you've shared with us. The Nigerian police has, via their page, Benjamin Hundeyin has put out some tweets. He's first of all mentioned that the CP was on ground, and then he mentioned that everything that was taken from the protesters has been returned to them. But you've raised a fresh angle to the conversation, which is physical and sexual assault, that I'm hoping that investigation is being done in that regard, and that, you and the other people who were arrested can find justice. And on the much larger scale, those who have been unlawfully, treated unlawfully, not just during this protest, but from the previous ones, the End Bad Governance protest and the NSAS protest, find some measure of justice. But thank you very much for your time with us this morning.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Right. It's been a conversation we've had this morning, quite chilling, but a conversation that needed to be had anyway. But let's share with you the conversations we've had so far and let you know what's in store still to come in the next hour. This morning, police tear gas NSAS memorial marchers at Lekki Toll. We're joined by Inibehe Efyong, who was there on ground, and we also had Hassan Taiwo Soweto, who you can see in this video, and is currently with us in the studio to share his account. Labour Party chieftain accuses Abia government of intimidation, and it does seem that things are starting to fall apart in the Labour Party. But now let's share what's coming up within the next hour.
Federal government set to hand over national grid to private operators. The newspaper front page is also the biggest stories making headlines across Nigeria this morning, and also Which Way Nigeria. Welcome once again. Now let's take you through the newspapers and share with you the major stories making headlines across Nigeria this Monday morning. Joining us is public affairs analyst Dotun Ojong. Good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Happy New Year.
Yeah,
Right.
good to see you.
Let's kick off with this Nigeria newspapers. The big one there says 20 million out-of-school children, or kids rather, potential Boko Haram and bandits in 10 years, says former President Olusegun Obasanjo. I'm sure a lot of people will agree with him. We can also find here FCT flags off 9 development projects in Abuja today. And also cholera. Death toll hits 28,386 infections in Ebonyi. Also on this Nigerian newspapers, price of cooking gas now out of our reach, says Nigerians. And also proliferation of PhD degrees, a crisis in academic integrity. I think the major story there is definitely the death toll in cholera cases in Nigeria, and also the claim by the former president that 20 million out-of-school kids are potential Boko Haram and bandit recruits in the next 10 years. These are the major stories on this Nigerian newspapers.
All right, now let's move to the Punch newspaper. On the front page of the Punch, REIT collapses 105 times in 10 years, despite $1.4 billion loans. Government fails to access additional $2.96 billion World Bank approved electricity infrastructure loans. Buhari records 93 grid collapses. Tinubu 12. Incessant grid collapse worries NERC consumers. Enters memorial. Amnesty activists tackle police over protesters' harassment. Super Eagles striker Boniface survives car crash in Germany. Foreign investors dump 355 billion naira stocks over forex crisis. Canada-based nurse, 2 businessmen nabbed for drug trafficking. Oya Dam socks Ogun, Lagos communities as flood water rises. Current insecurity worse than during my government, says Obasanjo. So it's like, that trading blames game. It's very interesting. 2 bad things, but one is, allow me to use the word, badder than the other. Petrol marketers import 123 million naira or 123 million liters and continue talks with Dangote. Army debunks COAS death rumors, retires 15 generals. Ganduje APC governors woo aggrieved aspirants for Ayedatiwa. INEC rejects PDP's request for state rec redeployment. And that's all on the front page of the Punch. Let's go to the Daily Independent.
Daily Independent this morning. Federal government to review fuel transportation and safety protocols across states, and that's with regards to the Jigawa tanker incidents. Very, very sad story. I may be taking the wrong Daily Independent. Yes, I definitely am taking the wrong one from the Daily Independent. Okay, yes, it says here, auto experts doubt success of federal government CNG vehicle conversion initiative. Say initiative lacks proper planning, safety questionable, facilities, spare parts, expertise, processes may be compromised. Standards Organization of Nigeria lacks capacity. And listen, I don't think there's any other major aspects of this whole conversation that have just not been mentioned here. This is the main and the key part of the whole CNG conversation that nobody seems to be having. And the federal government really to save face. And that's honestly what they're doing here. Trying to save face because of the crazy increment in the price of petrol. They have thrown this CNG idea out there to save face without going through, at least having the regular process that they should go through. What are the safety concerns that Nigerians would have? Who should take responsibility when those safety concerns, are faulty? Nobody really has had a broad conversation on CNG. They just throw it out there and say everybody should convert to CNG because it's a cheaper alternative. It for me, just tells a really irresponsible government towards the Nigerian citizens. Sarab urges Tinubu to stop using DSS and proxies to suppress voices. And also, NSA's anniversary, police release detained protesters. Enugu government, police insist no sit at home, assure citizens of security. Tinubu mandates Shetima to represent him at Chogum 2024. Seems the vice president is going to be really, really busy in the coming weeks or months. As Mr. President, seems to be, having him represent him everywhere. He just got back from Sweden, or maybe still in Sweden. But a judge urges CJN to end judicial rascality. APC Southwest governors, national leaders broke a peace ahead of Ondo gubernatorial poll. And also, Nigeria must move forward with love, not hate or anger. Tinubu gives DSS nod to replace chief security officer. I'm going to start, Mr. Ojon, this morning with of course, the CNG, which has piqued my attention this morning. Auto experts doubt the success of the government's CNG vehicle conversion initiative. Say it lacks proper planning and the safety is questionable.
Yeah. When you talk about planning, I totally agree to the fact that maybe the government did not actually think it through, like you have rightly mentioned. Maybe because of the outcry on the removal of petrol subsidy. And like I've repeatedly mentioned here, that the problem is not with the removal of petrol subsidy. It's always about two things. Number one, what control you do not have, you have only a minimal input on what controls the prices, forex. So what government after government have been able to do in Nigeria is to support their currency, because they know when you measure the amount of your export, put it side by side with your import, you know that throwing your currency open is actually destroying the currency. So they did those two things at the same time, and I know that that's what got us to where we are today. So in a way to actually, how do you put the word? I don't want to use the word safe face now, because they think that, oh, if we talk Nigeria into CNG, that's going to reduce the burden on petrol. CNG is not bad in itself, like I've mentioned to you before, but the process, the planning is not. See, I often tell people there's a philosophical saying that the way you do one thing is the way you do all things. So planning issue is not limited to CNG. We have problem with planning generally in Nigeria, and that's why you see that we continue to jump from one system of execution to the other, because we have not imbibed the character of thinking through before execution. So I think majorly when you talk about planning, I have major issue with it. In fact, that's why I've been dragging my feet as to, who will I also rush and convert my vehicle? So, and because of the many years dependence on petrol also, Nigerians are also a bit very skeptical, because number one, we have issues with the government. Everybody is thinking, can I actually trust my government to a point where my government will tell me to do this and I will do it? So it's a whole lot of conversation, and I think we will continue to broaden the conversation, but just know that the way we as individuals do one thing is the way we do all things. We've had problem with planning in the country, and it's not limited to the CNG.
And I totally agree with you. The lack of planning is mostly because of one thing that I keep pointing out, the lack of accountability.
Yeah.
Because again, if there are safety concerns with CNG, is the federal government ready for that responsibility? And just like I mentioned, this is not a properly thought out strategy. This is really just, we need to find a solution or something to tell the Nigerian people to save face because of what is going on with petrol. And so they started suggesting CNG. But the Standards Organization of Nigeria is not in any way, shape or form ready to handle the responsibility of ensuring safety of CNG conversion in Nigeria.
You see, when you talk about, and I need to quickly talk about some of these units of government, most of the time we don't know also what they are going through. For example, part of the planning should have been a conversation with them. What capacity do you have? Will you be able to properly supervise this conversion to ensure that all the safety standards are met? This conversation never happened. So the announcement of removal of fuel subsidy is political. So the announcement of CNG operation in Nigeria is equally political. And my experience in both politics and practice has shown that most of the declarations and announcements of government that are purely political don't get to benefit the people as much as the policies that are well thought out by the government.
All right, let's move to the Punch newspaper and look at the big story. They're talking about the grid collapse. Punch reports is 105 times in the past 10 years. There are conversations about the possibility of the Nigerian grid, the grid being handed over to the private sector. So talk to us about, this. They're saying that the government has failed to access additional 2.96 billion naira World Bank approved electricity and infrastructure loans. And, the NERC is worried. They are worried about the incessant collapses. I think there was another one that happened over the course of the weekend.
Yes. You will remember, I think the first time we met, you remember my quote, and I hold it very dear to my heart, that Nigeria grid will not allow the national grid to function. Grid is G-R-E-E-D. You see that there are three, if you have properly peeped into government, there are three major areas where monies have been taken out. And there's not, it's as pure as that. The first is security. Because people have been able to merchandise security, it makes insecurity very popular. And there's nothing anybody can do about that. We may continue to fight this war against banditry. We may continue to fight this war against Boko Haramism for a very long time until we understand that people are making a whole lot of money out of this. The second area is this area of power. In the past years, you will have heard about 16 billion naira investment when President Olusegun Obasanjo was there. You will have heard about state of emergency declared by President Yaradua, late President Yaradua, and the amount of investment he put into it. But again, you still discover that we hover around the 8,000 generation and 4,000 distribution. We haven't gone past that. And the conversation we need to have is that should we continue to connect more people to the national grid? That is not working. In a country of 250 million people, at least reasonably to have light, and I don't want to talk about whether some people are in band A or band B or bandit, as the case may be. What I'm talking about is that what kind of power would be reasonable for the Nigerian people? And I'm thinking in my head, 250 million people, can we work towards having 50,000 megawatt of electricity distributed to the people? And I'm not talking about generation, because the language of government is, oh, we have generated 10,000 megawatt of electricity. But how much of that get to the people? And that is why agricultural and entrepreneurship potentials are being destroyed in Nigeria today. Because there's nothing you can talk about. My friend just returned from Makurdi, and he was painting the picture of what happened, of how spoiled food line up a road to the to one particular community, because there's no way those people can preserve it. And at the end of the day, we come to talk about grammar of people in abject poverty, of people, and these are people that have made effort to go farming. But because of the complexity of electricity, without energy, we can do nothing. And that's the truth. In fact, you can also, most of the times when you want to read at night, when there's no power, you just lazy out and sleep off. And you struggle even most of the time to be productive. To sleep is a struggle. So everything around the world is actually tied around electricity. And it's so disheartening. I'll tell you this morning, whether you're not aware, that Lagos had this power plant even before Germany. Before Germany. So we should not be talking about close to 100 years after, and we are not talking about, oh, we are still struggling with 5,000 megawatt of electricity. So until we get to a point where it becomes a national disaster, and we know that we will not continue to watch people take our national asset and money away in the name of trying to fix electricity year in, year out, and nothing is being done. I'm not in support of getting additional loan. I'm in support of investigating what we have spent on electricity before and the little resource we have, how we can maximize it.
Are you in support of it being handed over to the private sector?
The private sector, you see, what is your experience with the private sector? We've gone back and forth. In 2003, maybe you have forgotten. 2002, sorry. One of the things that former Vice President Atiku Abubakar showed to the people when he was doing his privatization, when he was chairman of privatization committee, was the fact that once we privatize all of these things, they are going to work efficiently. But we discovered that at the end of the day, national asset, they were selling to their friends, their cohorts, and family members. And it didn't get to improve anything. So handing it over to the private sector is not the issue. Who are they handing it over to? Is it friends of politicians who will go through the back door to take these things again because they want to make more money?
I mean, so there's that angle, but I think that there's also the part where it wasn't fully privatized. The government still has its hand in aspects
distribution
of the power sector that makes simply privatizing the distribution company is not enough. The transmission, the generation, those parts are still really, to a large extent handled by government. And so it's not, I don't think the issue with the privatization is the sole problem with the power sector. Yes, maybe the privatization aspect should have been handled better, but government's role in generation and maybe I think slightly in transmission are still key aspects of why we've not necessarily seen level of growth. Because when we did the same thing with telecom sector, you can see the difference and how much improvement happened with telecom sector compared to when we've done it with the power sector. Yeah. So it's not just the, you gave it to your friends and cronies. That's the problem. No, I feel like that aspect is still important.
You see, this is where the issue is, because quickly when you want to handle issues like this, you just look backwards to see exactly what the experiences are. The first thing is that majority of Nigerians, private individuals, have oil well in the country. You will say the hand of government is still there, but there are sensitive national assets that government will never allow individuals to run completely, and power is one of them. So maybe we should be pleading with them to hand off. But again, because they also know the kind of people they are going to sell these things to, and I'm being honest with you, individuals who are credible may not at the end of the day get anything out of it, and I'm talking from experience. So these are some of the things. They can leave telecommunication because the impact on national security is minimal and limited. They can leave some of those things, but there are sensitive areas like petrol, energy, and all of those that they will not live in the hand of private sector completely. So even when they say they want to privatize, at the end of the day, it will still be 40-60 or 30-70 as we are used to. Yeah,
but I think that for me, the thing is, the Nigerian factor is still pretty obvious, with the power sector. That's why, we find it that way. Let's go about the NSAS memorial. It says the Amnesty International activists tackle police over protesters' harassment, which took place yesterday. But generally, for me, the conversation on the NSAS memorial is beyond just what happened yesterday. It's also, taking a broader look at where we are today with police reforms. How much better has Nigerian police become over time? And how much have we really achieved, post the NSAS protest?
Okay, we have not, we were able to achieve a name change, but we didn't do, we haven't gone so far with character change. And I think one very important thing that everyone should understand is the fact that when you're talking about reform in every sector, it is not a uniform, it is in behavior. And once you don't get to a point where you reform the behavior of people, even if you change their uniform, their character remains the same. So we haven't gone, and it's not even a subject of the community people again. Even the police as a unit of the federation or as a unit in government is not even happy with itself. And I can say it, on Thursday, retired police officers were trying to beg the federal government that their retirement, what do they call that thing, can no longer feed them. Yeah. An average policeman you see on the road now, if I mention the cadres and even as an officer, starting from ASP, what they take home can hardly take them home. So the reality of police reform in Nigeria is only being mouthed at every point in time that there's confrontation, at every point in time that there's outcry in the community. Nobody has really gone deep into reforming the police the way it should be. And one of the things I keep telling the people is that the police is the marketer of the behavior of the government, directly to the people. Now, for example, if you say, my government is fighting corruption, oh, we have EFCC, and people still see the police collect money from them on the highway, they will not be able to relate with the bigger fight that you think you are fighting against corruption. So the police, the behavior of the police portray the behavior of the politician. Yeah. The behavior of the politician says of the character of the entire community. So you see how interwoven this is in community and communal living. So we haven't done much about police reform, and it's really heartbreaking at this point in time, because the Nigerian system when you allow these people to go out, for example, all of these, their missions that they go out, they come back with commendation. How come we are not able to police ourselves, to respect one another within our country? It's simply because of the fact that maybe the people in power are yet to come home with the times that police is the symbol of governance of any nation. And the earlier you reform the Nigeria police, the better. Because I'm even afraid that the protests, and maybe call this political prophecy, the protests that will lead to something that will change our life as a people in this country may be once again from police brutality. Because at every point in time, you still see them. I still drive past, I still see how they harass people on the road. Sometimes I have to practically park and intervene. Because these people don't know the behavior of the 21st century man. They just say anybody they see is a Yahoo boy. Anybody they see is a Yahoo girl. No, that's not how to police a community. So reform, we haven't really done much about it, and it's quite unfortunate.
It really is unfortunate. There are more stories. Unfortunately, we cannot take them. This is all that we can take this morning. We'll be back again to review more papers, same time tomorrow. Mr. Dr. Mojan, thank you very much for your time with us.
Thank you.
All right, more to come this morning. We'll go on a break, and when we come back, we, of course, have Which Way Nigeria coming up.
My Monday morning message is simply to say to Nigerians that when analyzing your leaders, there's this common misconception of incompetence with leadership in Nigeria. There's this misconception that these people who fight so hard to win elections and fight for political appointments are somewhat just short of great ideas on fixing Nigeria. And so Nigerians need to pity them, give them time, share ideas with them even. But my message this morning is to simply say that we should stop giving these people excuses. These people are not short of ideas or good advice. They have around them access to special advisors and senior special advisors, hundreds of them even. They have the resources to recruit experts on any field. The reason they are not intentional about fixing your country is because they don't want to. And there's nothing to force them to sit up. A nation of 200 million people dealing with 4,000 megawatts of electricity is not because the leaders are clueless. They just don't want to. These people are not unintelligent. These leaders are master strategists when it's time to play politics and grab power. And if you know very well, it takes a lot of strategic decisions, plotting, scheming to achieve political positions in Nigeria. It's not a thing that is done by senseless or clueless people. You can argue that maybe they are only smart and intelligent with grabbing power, but you can't argue that these people are dull. They very well know what Nigeria needs to do to be better. At least they have all the possible access to expert advice for governance. So again, stop giving these people excuses. Stop creating excuses for why these people fail you. These leaders and politicians are not stupid. Yes, some may say that, some of them may be completely incompetent or round pegs in square holes. But you might notice that incompetence is clearly on purpose. They are not short of advice. They don't lack experts with the best knowledge on policy decisions. It's likely that they just don't want to. It's not because they don't know what to do. If we want to end oil theft and increase oil production for Nigeria, they know what to do. If Nigeria wants to fix our refineries and those who are in charge want those refineries fixed, they know what to do. If Nigeria should have 50,000 megawatts of electricity in the near future, they very well know what to do. And if they don't do it, it's not because they're clueless. It's because they don't want to. Stop giving these people excuses. You may be understanding enough to say that, well, some of these things take time. They can't be fixed in 1 year. And yes, we all agree. But we all have witnessed Nigeria go through more than 60 years of slow but steady decline with no growth in sight. And if we would see growth, there should be some clear sign of intentionality in the actions that our leaders take. And if you can't see it, then it's likely because there's no interest in growth from these people. So again, it's not because they're incompetent. Stop giving them excuses. It's likely that they just don't want to. Good morning, Nigerians.
very detailed questioning happening there. And of course, we will keep bringing these questions your way, through Which Way Nigeria and through the conversations that we have here on Breakfast Central. And now let's move on to a conversation about power. A transformer explosion at the Jeba transmission substation in Niger State, Nigeria, triggered a third national power grid collapse in just 1 week, early Saturday morning. The collapse drastically reduced the country's power supply from over 3,000 megawatts to just 47 megawatts, leaving many areas without electricity for several hours. The Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission expressed concern over the growing frequency of grid disturbances and has announced plans to conduct a public hearing to investigate the cause of these repeated failures.
The Commission is also moving to transfer grid management to an independent system operator as outlined in the Electricity Act of 2023. Joining us is the former Chief Executive Officer of the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission, Sam Amadi. Good morning and thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Good morning.
Great to have you. I think we'll first of all just get a quick assessment of, what you think our major issue is. If it is a policy issue, if it is an infrastructure issue, if it is simply government's will, that is the major problem with Nigeria's power sector.
Well, I think it's all. Primarily, it's a technical frailty. So you have a system that has low capacity, maybe low spinning reserve, a high level of unreliability. So system collapse arises from either that there's imbalance in energy supply. Maybe this imbalance arises from shortage in terms of demand supply. The system is a machine, so there must be balance, equilibrium. So if, for example, there's acute shortage, something happens, it will affect the performance of the grids. So those are some of the issues that you experience. Again, policy, yes, talk about policy. We have a very radial, difficult to manage grid and very low capacity for investment or attracting investment or even efficient management of that grid. So oftentimes, system collapses arise from failure of management in terms of managing, monitoring, maintenance, and vigilance to ensure that if there are faults, you clear them quickly. Again, you also talk about leadership. We've had more system collapses in the last 4 years. In fact, this year alone had so many. So it goes back to the level of leadership in the sector connected to the to grid management. So I think you can see that all these factors are policy, technical frailty, and lack of managerial capability. They all interplay. The interesting thing, though, is you keep hearing the minister talk about 6,000 megawatts, 7,000 megawatts. They're going to hit it in the next. That's not the point. You need some level of reliability, some improvement in reliability, in available hour for resupply, not abstract academic capacity growth. Yes, we may have 13,000 megawatts nameplate, meaning if you plate all the capacity of all our generators according to manufacturing their turbine, then we can say we have 13,000. But if you talk in terms of how many of them can ever get to the grid, you don't have less than 4,500. And then if you talk about how many times you're going to have that 4,500 effectively evacuated, distributed to homes and houses in Nigeria, probably get back to 2,800. So the capacity is not growing in spite of the political talk around improvement in installed capacity. So we are suffering because, in my view, we've had no improvement at all in real sense since 2015. Improvement is significant improvement that results in real expansion of capability. Capability is measured by what you can take from the to the transmission to distribution flawlessly. So if you used to have 3-4 collapses a year, now we have maybe one. That's real improvement. If we used to have 3-4 hours of electricity on average, or a minimum of average of, let's say, 10 hours or 8 hours across the country, and now we have 16 hours across all customer classes, not just given by A, but everybody in the system. That's real improvement. So we really have not improved at all, in my view, in the areas that count, which is reliable, affordable, and adequate power supply to Nigerians.
I think that, if you look at the Punch newspaper, for example, it reports that the grid has collapsed 105 times in 10 years, despite $1.4 billion loans. I'll come back to talk about the, World Bank approved electricity infrastructure loans. But I think a general question that we hear often is, in layman terms, when we hear the grid has collapsed, a number of Nigerians tweet about it on X and talk about it, but don't actually know what it means or where the fault lies. You just hear stories about how there are potential cabals that benefit from Nigeria's power sector being disadvantaged, which I hope that you can speak to. But in layman terms, what would you say is the meaning of the national grid collapsing, and who should the Nigerians hold or expect some form of accountability from?
Well, in layman terms, what it means for the grid to collapse is that you have zero. Total collapse means there is zero power available. And it can happen many ways. For example, if there's a major fault and the cost of the lines, the grid, it means that even though the generators have capacity to generate power, they are supplying zero. So the system is cut off. So a good example would be this. If you have a line that carries water to their homes, and that line blows off, it is blown up, and then no more water is flowing into that line. And all the water coming in from the reservoir or from your what you call it, your water plants are not entering the line, and therefore at the end of consumption of water, there's no single drop. That is what it means to have a collapse. It means that at that moment, there is no power flowing into businesses. Our grid is cut off because of a fault. That means that nobody generates. And the thing with plants that once there's that system disturbance, the generating plants shut down. So when they shut down, it might take, even if you recover that, you control that fault, you now have to have a period of power coming gradually. So you see them say, we have zero in the network. Nobody has grid power. Then suddenly they start picking 10, 20, 30, 40, 100, 200, maybe within a time of a few hours, then the grid can come back to 100%, meaning you come back to a point where all the loads, all the water supply from different water plants can now flow into the system. So grid collapse simply means that at that point, if it's total complete collapse, it means that there's zero power in any of the distribution outlets. The distribution companies in Nigeria don't have zero power to sell anybody. Why? Because the system collapse or disturbance has cut off the grid and then shut down all the plants. There are a few plants that will cause spinning reserve. Use them to start spinning, to bring back, or black starts. They give you the black start, they start you up again. So it's like a car, knocking engine. When something, for example, once the diesel finishes, they knock. So when you put this diesel, you have to bleed it and gradually bring it back to life. That's how it works. So there's no power available to give you because the system has disrupted it and the generators have shut down, and there's cannot carry any energy, and discos are not to supply.
Okay, so I'm hoping that you can also help us shed some light on the electricity infrastructure loans that were given by the World Bank and the Africa Development Bank. What really have these loans been used for, and why has the power sector not yet been improved upon?
The first is that these loans are World Bank and funder support for distribution improvement. The idea here is that, look, you need quick intervention to ramp up capability in network. Part of the reason why we have collapses is that the grid, both the transmission grid and distribution grid, are very weak. And the distribution companies on their own financial profile cannot raise the required finances to quickly improve their grid. So the intervention, loans and grants is to help quick intervention to build up that resilience. But look at the problem though. if you make the first 3 levels, one is that oftentimes those funds are not wisely invested. So if you misinvest them, whether by corruption or whether by not identifying the real network constraint, and you invest in the wrong ones, then it may not improve. That's about number 2. Those investments, as you're making them, you also need to do other corresponding complementary investments or take other actions that complement that. So, for example, if you give Abuja Disco or Lagos Eco or Ikeja maybe 300 million or 500 million naira to improve their network, supply, meter, at the end of the day, the other end of it, let's say transmission is not being improved commensurately, then you're going to have system failure still, because you have the meters, you have the reinforced network transformers, but the distribution, the transmission that carries that power is not optimal. So that's why we use a system approach. You have to evolve, evolution. The system needs to be almost comprehensive. You have to do end-to-end. You have to improve at all ends. You look at the vulnerability analysis, identify constraints, and treat them almost simultaneously, so that the investment has complementary investment that allows improvement in quality of power supply. If you do one investment and they don't do the complementary side of it that is required to drive up performance, then you see a failed change management strategy. So I would say that part of the reason is that maybe those funds are inadequate, maybe they're not effectively and prudently used, and thirdly, maybe there's little corresponding and complementary investment in enhancing profitability and improving quality of service delivery.
All right. I also want to ask, Nigeria currently has a new Minister of Power, Adebe Adelabu. Since he got into office, have you seen any strategic moves that have been made that tell you that in the next few years we will see an improvement in the, of course, power generation, transmission, and distribution across Nigeria? Is there any possibility that, as it stands, we will be able to build the infrastructure that is necessary to be able to generate and distribute maybe 20,000 megawatts, 30,000 megawatts of electricity in the next few years?
Well, I think investments has been made, but some of them are useful, but again, inadequate. Reform needs to be comprehensive. Reforms need to be well defined. Reforms need to be coherent to work. Reforms need to be coherent to work. So that means that if you're not coherent, if you're not comprehensive and coordinated, it will not work. If in the last 8 years we've had few results from those investments, then I do not think too much hope for massive improvement if you don't improve the fundamentals. And the fundamentals are 3, in my view. 1 is leadership that understands, diagnoses properly the problem of the sector before investment. 2, we need also to be pragmatic and efficient in those investments in the electricity network. And 3rd, I think we also need to have a sense in which we are solving the political crisis of leadership as well, because oftentimes we've seen that efforts to improve the sector are suffered from very poor leadership at the level of political leadership, ministers, heads of parastatals. So we need to strengthen at these 3 levels.
All right.
Sam Amadi, thank you very much for your time this morning. We hope that we can have you join us more regularly. We, of course, wish you a very interesting week ahead. Thanks for your time once again.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. All right. It's been a very interesting Monday morning. Let's share with you what comes up later today on News Central TV. 10 a.m., we're bringing you Jasiri this morning. Of course, 12 p.m. West African time, News Central Now. Much later, Politics HQ comes your way at 7 p.m. West African time.
Thank you very much.
This is where we will be saying goodbye this morning. Thank you for spending your Monday morning with us. The key aspects of the discussions that, we will, ensure that we continue to highlight. And of course, a continued conversation on police reforms that are necessary. With what we are seeing currently, it's heartbreaking that not much has changed. And also, the issues concerning the electricity generation here in Nigeria. But for now, it's goodbye. We'll see you again tomorrow morning. I am Ousted Ogbonwa.
And I am Olive Emodi. Have a wonderful day.